All right. Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. Today on the show, we have a ChooseFI community member, Josue from Southern California. And he wrote into me a couple months ago with just an incredible email that it absolutely blew me away. And I knew we had to bring his story to the podcast and to the larger community because it's just a tale of everything we talk about here, everything that's good about the ChooseFI message is encapsulated here in his story. It's taking immense action with your finances, right? Doing all of these things that move you in the right direction. It's about upping your mental game and stopping that drift. As he said in the email, I was drifting through life on the standard path, but now I am choosing FI. And I just absolutely love that. And it sent chills down my spine. And I knew we had to have him on the podcast. So with that, welcome to ChooseFI.
You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
All right, Josue, welcome to ChooseFI. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this should be a lot of fun. I'm just looking forward to chatting with you. We had a nice little 10-minute talk before we hit record, and you just instantly felt like a friend. And I mean that as sincerely as humanly possible. And like, I would love to just have a chat with you because I think that's what's so important is like finding people's stories in FI, right? And how we're all on this path together. And it really is, as we say, this is a crowdsourced personal finance show, right? And we mean that it sounds kind of like jargony, but we mean it in the best possible way. And that like we all have things to add to this community. And that's what's so beautiful. We all not only have things to add, but we get inspiration from each other and the actions we're all taking. So let's go back. We actually don't have to go all that far back in the past, right? We're talking maybe the beginning of 2021, it sounds like, is when you found the FI community in general. First, I guess, is my memory correct on that? And like just place us in time then, like where you were financially, mindset, all that stuff before finding the FI community.
Yeah, so going back to 2021, you're right. That's when I found the ChooseFI YouTube, actually. And I was on YouTube a lot at the time, learning different things, how to fix appliances or different cars or all the stuff you can learn on YouTube, right? And I started getting suggestions, I guess, from YouTube regarding different financial things, real estate, and so forth. And when I happened upon the episode you did with Michael Kitsis, it just kind of opened up a Pandora's box. I mean, to me, what he was talking about was amazing. I'd never heard of it. And then the production value that you guys were bringing to the channel it blew my mind. So from there, we just start episode after episode. And at the time, I never even listened to a podcast, Brad. I'm going to be honest with you. I wasn't a podcast listener at all. I didn't have a podcast player on my phone. Short time later, downloaded a podcast player and have listened to every single ChooseFI episode since. So it's been a long road, 500 plus hours of listening to you and Jonathan talk and all the knowledge you guys drop. And it's been a lot of fun. But going back to your question, the mindset. So I felt like during the pandemic, we obviously all went through, that difficult mental time. A lot of things were not known. It was scary, but I found some silver lining in it, in that it allowed me to spend a lot more time with my family, quality time. But as far as mindset goes, I was just kind of drifting. I was just kind of living from one day to the next, not really too much thought about the future or what comes next, or not really thinking outside the box, not really trying to grow. I didn't have a growth mindset. It was just a fixed mindset of today's another day, and let's kind of just push through, and tomorrow's another day. And well, I thought that was fine. Having discovered financial independence, ChooseFI in particular, and all the resources that you guys have put forth through all the episodes, has just, it's pushed me so far forward, both mentally, financially. I feel like I'm 10x the person I was in 2021.
That's incredible. Yeah, I know that very first time you emailed me, it was about a month after finding the podcast, and I think you said at that point you had already taken action. You'd listened to like 46 episodes or some such, and you started making financial moves from that very first. And before we get into obviously the nuts and bolts, which is always important, and I think it's nice for people to hear like, oh, this is what you actually did. But what do you think it was about that first episode with Michael Kitces? Because frankly, like that's a pretty in-depth episode, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not just like your standard, like welcome to general FI mindset. That's like real in-depth technical knowledge. Like, what do you think it was that made you open to that particular episode? Like when you're saying you were kind of just going through life at that point, and like it's not as negative as we're making it out to be, because
Right.
we're all just going through life. That's the default state. Like it's not like that's inherently evil or bad, or your life was on the wrong track. It was almost like before you, and this sounds so ridiculous, but like saw the light of FI, like it feels like there is that change post. But at that point, you were just living a normal suburban life or middle class, right? Like you have 2 kids, you're married, like there was nothing terrible going on here. It was almost like the lack of knowledge of the better way. But that said, there usually has to be some like awakening point that would make you want to change. And I'm actually surprised that it was the Kitces episode that did it for you. As great as an episode as that was.
Yeah, the Kitces episode just kind of blew my mind. A lot of the stuff that you guys were talking about, just like you said, I had never even heard of. I didn't even know existed. But the level of information that was being brought forth, and then the way you guys present it, you and Jonathan have a way of making complex topics understandable. And you, Brad, in particular, I really like your style, because when you're hosting the podcast, you're acting as the listener and asking the questions that I would want to ask. And that type of thing is like gold, because it's almost like I'm interviewing these people because you're asking the questions that I would ask, right? And so, yeah, that episode just kind of, I'm curious by nature. And so that kind of was like, there's a whole nother world out there. So the very next episode was J.L. Collins, the stock series. And so that one was even more, and much the same way that you can take a really complex topic and just kind of make it understandable. I feel like JL in that episode, same thing. He took the stock market, which to me was like speaking a different language. And I still struggle to understand certain concepts about it, but I'm constantly learning. I feel like I know so much more about it now. But to be more direct to your answer, those 2 things, those 2 guys, those 2 podcasts, just opened up a whole level of curiosity in me, and I just kept digging, and I haven't stopped since.
That's so brilliant. And yeah, there's just something about JL that is just, it's comforting. It's almost, as I look at it, as like the like 80-20 analysis, but it's actually more than that. It's like the 99-1, if you will. Like, okay, you mean while this stock market, it seems so confusing, even to me. Like I was a CPA, I theoretically should have maybe felt more comfortable than the average person, but I didn't, right? Like I went most of my adult life feeling uncertain about the stock market. And I think that's normal, right? Because you hear these phrases, and like, I'm not a vilify the media person at all. That's like the antithesis of what I am. But you hear, oh, gamble in the stock market or play the stock market, right? Or like all you see is the red and the green. And like, it's not about the fundamental underpinnings of what are you buying. You're buying a little ownership piece of companies, right? But what do we think about? We think about it as just making money in the short term. And that's what's so cool about what JL did is, I think to me, it was like, it helped me sleep better at night.
Absolutely. Yeah. As soon as I heard the episode, I went out and I downloaded the book on my Kindle and just devoured the thing. I mean, it was such a brilliant book. It distilled such a complex topic and made it easy to understand, almost as if your dad had written you letters, which is exactly what he did, right? He wrote letters to his daughter and put them in a book. And it was so cool to have that wisdom just bestowed upon all of us. Anybody who picks up that book feels the same way. I mean, everybody, I think, that's been on the podcast or that even listens to the podcast, I'm sure has read the book and knows how valuable it is. And then from there, like I said, once I got started, once that Pandora's box opened, it's just constant devouring of information. And I've gone from that fixed mindset, like I mentioned earlier, to just an absolute growth mindset, trying to learn and grow and advance and just be better.
Yeah, I love that. And let's be clear, it wasn't just you devouring information, right? Because I think that sadly is where a lot of people stop, right? And like you hear that, I always get the exact quote slightly wrong, but like if it was just about information, we'd all be billionaires with six-pack abs is like the kind of, joking statement. But like it truly is about taking action, right? Because
Absolutely.
you could have, right there, all the information in the world exists, but you have to get up off the couch, as we say, and take action. And it seems like you did that from the very first.
Yeah, so going back to the whole YouTube and just kind of watching what pops up, I did a lot of that. And exactly like you said, I devoured a lot of financial information before I discovered ChooseFI. But how much action did I take? None. And why? Because although they were giving good information, it just still kind of had an aura of like, it's too complex for me to really get into it. I don't know where to start. I feel like the people that are giving me this advice or giving me this information are way too advanced. I can't ask questions. I feel like it's just too much. And so listening to you and Jonathan, and you, like I said, specifically when you asked the questions that I would ask, it just made me feel comfortable. It made me feel like I could ask questions. And then reading JL's book with the tone that he has, it's just like, hey, this is really not that complex. It's not some magic formula that you have to know, and these terms are all important, and you need to understand everything about the stock market, backwards, forwards, upside down, and backwards before you can invest. It's really not that complicated. And so I just took the advice. I jumped in, and kind of a funny story. When I mentioned to you in the email, I had an old 401k from when I was about 19. I had a job and I got some good advice, but it wasn't whole advice. And what I mean is, I was told, hey, you're young, you should put a bunch of money into the 401k and try to max it out if you can. So I said, okay. And that's what
great
I did.
Advice, right?
And that's what I did. But the problem is, where did the money get invested? I don't know. And it was one of those things where kind of a sliding scale. Are you looking for growth? Are you looking for, and it was more about what's your risk tolerance than picking individual mutual funds or what have you. I didn't even know what a mutual fund was back then.
Yeah, sure. At 19, who does, right?
Yeah. And so I got that advice. A lot of years later, that money was just sitting in an IRA because I left that company, transferred it to an IRA, and just kind of sat there. I honestly forgot about it for a lot of years.
Okay.
And I never really gave it much attention because it was just too complex for me. It was too complicated. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what any of the statement meant. And so I just kind of left it. And that's another thing, like I mentioned about drift, is I could have taken that statement, Googled all those terms, and learned it all myself. But there's so much information out there that you just get lost in the complexity and in sometimes the manner in which it's put out there. But again, going back to finding you guys just made it so approachable that it just said, you know what? It's not that hard. There's a lot of people doing it. It's a crowdsourced show. And you guys have even said it on a couple of occasions. Hey, we're not gurus. We're not experts. We're just regular guys, just like you. And we're all on the path. And you don't need to be, it's not a 0 or 1. That's a quote from you. It's not a 0 or 1 thing. It's not, you're not FI or you are FI. It's everybody has their own path, their own way, their own style. And man, that just gave me the reassurance that, hey, I can do this too.
That is so great. Yeah. And I'm glad that really stuck out to you in terms of, I don't usually like pat ourselves in the back by any means, because truly I am just a regular guy and I'm just trying to distill information. So like that actually, like it makes me feel so wonderful that is your takeaway from it, that like you're just asking the question, like you, Brad, are just asking the questions that the audience would want to ask. Like, because I always have that, like that white belt mentality of like, I don't have a ton of knowledge on a ton of subjects. I mean, I have a little bit of knowledge on a bunch of subjects, but like, I want to learn more. And like, how do you learn more? Is you ask questions. And I think so many people, so many of us like get so caught up in ego, right? In terms of like, hey, I don't want to look stupid. I could never ask that simplistic question because I don't want to look stupid. And like, I've actually taken the exact opposite path of like, if I have this question, I feel like everybody has this question. So like, I'm not worried about looking stupid maybe anymore, right? And maybe I don't think this was the case my entire life by any means, but like, I'm not worried about that anymore because I just want to get the information.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think in the past, I was that type of person, like we all are. I don't want to look dumb. I don't want to ask the simplistic questions that I feel like I should know at my age. And so I didn't. I wouldn't ask those questions. And now I don't mind asking simplistic questions, because if I don't know, how else am I going to learn than if I ask, right? And so I'm making it a point to put pride aside and just try to learn and grow. And one thing that I want to mention is, in the newsletter a couple of weeks ago, you put out a small section, a paragraph about growth mindset versus fixed mindset and going from one to the other. And the way you worded it was perfect. And you have a knack for doing that, saying things the right way or writing them the right way. And that was going from proving yourself to improving yourself. And I think that's what's happened with me. So proving myself would be, oh, I shouldn't ask these questions because I should already know. I'm going to pretend like I know or kind of avoid the subject. Where now I don't mind. I'll ask the questions because I want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that subtle shift, right? Like, and I, like we were both saying, like we're not always like this, the two of us. And most people, they have, we have that pride. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to be embarrassed, but that's a road to nowhere. That's a road
Yes.
to being constantly worried that you're going to be found out, right? That you're some expert, or you're pawning yourself off as some expert. You're going to be found out, and actually not ever learning, not ever becoming an expert, right? Like, so it's the exact opposite path you should take. And I love that you focus on that, on the growth mindset as opposed to the fixed, and to show that like you can change, right? Like I think one of the biggest things for you has been this zest for learning. And you talked in the email to me about all these books that you've read. And I mean, this is not just like, hey, I've been a 30 book a year reader for the last 20 years of my life. Like this was something that's fairly recent, but it sounds like it's transformed like your entire life.
Oh, it's brand new. I have never been a reader. I've always been a good learner. I learn fast and I like to learn, but books never did it for me, which is why I was on YouTube trying to learn things and grow in that way. And that's great and all, but sometimes you miss the fine details. You miss the different opinions that you might get from opposing views and things like that. And so one of the things that early on you guys espoused a lot was ChooseFI, Friends of the Library. And I thought that's pretty cool. There is a lot of cool things at the library. And my wife was an avid reader. She read a ton of books. But to me, it never really interested me. And then I said, you know what? I'll give it a shot. And I read that Simple Path to Wealth. Awesome. And it just dominoed from there. And now I am that 30 book a year reader. Over the last 2 years, I've read 50 or 60 books already on a wide range of topics, from financial to health books to, you name it. I've run the gamut. And the cool thing is there's so much more to learn. There's so much more to learn. And I've gone away from watching TV and watching YouTube to every moment I get now. I'm a book with legs. I'm always reading.
The Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett, a book
Exactly.
with legs. Man, I think you know this show better than I do at this point.
Yeah, I felt like I've spent hours and hours with you guys. And you're right, Brad. Having only spoken to you for 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes so far, I feel like I know you, man. I feel like, of course, I've heard you speak for so many hours, and I just have this level of comfort talking to you. again, because you're approachable, you allow questions, all this stuff, man. It just, again, tremendous props for your style and the way you do things.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much. It's I think if I'm ever feeling bad about myself, I'm going to give you a quick call just to give me a pep talk. So let's talk about books real quick in terms of, or maybe just taking information in, right? Because again, there's that fine line between taking too much information in and taking action, not taking action, right? So I'm actually curious. So before we even get to the taking action part, because that's a massive part of your story, but in terms of, hey, there is a whole world. It's like a paradox of choice, right? Like there's a whole world of information out there. And like you said, it runs the gamut of financial stuff, history, self-help, emotions, mindset, health, which I think we're both really into. Like, how do you, like, what's the top of the funnel, if you will, in terms of, hey, here's how I learn about new books? Like, do you like podcasts, YouTube? Like, where do you start in essence? Because I know this sounds like a question without a ton of distinction, but I think it's really important for people because it sometimes seems like there is too much out there. And I don't know where I don't know where to start. So, I mean, you have transformed your life in terms of this. Like, where do you start?
So one of the things I do is I listen to a lot of podcasts now, where before I wasn't listening to any. And depending on the different guests, they might mention a book or they themselves have written a book. And so if I listen to the episode the whole way through and there's some level of information that I want to just dig deeper on, I go straight to either the library or I try to download an ebook from, I use Cloud Library. At my local library, we have downloadable ebooks. And so I do that a lot. And even if I don't necessarily agree with what the book says, there was one in particular. I can't recall the title now, but as I'm reading it, I was like, I don't know if I really agree with all the things this guy's saying. But I read it all the way through because I think it's important to have both sides of the argument, so to speak, and that allows you to kind of pick through any bias that there may be. So, yeah, to answer your question, primarily from podcasts or recommendations from podcast guests, and one kind of leads to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And that's kind of how it's been.
Yeah, that's great. And I agree wholeheartedly about like trying to step outside of those echo chambers, right? Like finding people that disagree with you. There's great value in that. And especially sadly in the environment that we're in 2022, it seems like people do just kind of revert to their echo chambers. And obviously this is not a political show. We'll never get into that kind of stuff clearly, but like that is a large portion of what's wrong, right? Like is we're just looking for confirmation bias of like our pre-existing, not even thoughts, but just beliefs and like what we feel.
Right.
And it's just not the way to be like an intellectually robust person, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. One question for you, actually, Brad. How do you go about picking books? You talk to a lot of really cool people with a lot of big ideas. How do you figure out what to read and the progression there?
Yeah, I think for me, and you and I were joking about this, that you think I'm a little maybe hard on myself in terms of just in general. The self-deprecation runs a little into maybe being way too hard on myself. But I like to say like, not the negative aspect of like a mile wide, an inch deep, but like my knowledge is like 50 miles wide and maybe an inch or two deep. Like I'm not the world's expert at anything, but what I think I've been able to cultivate is like being able to like put ideas and commonalities together and look for like the signal amidst the noise. So that's actually at this point and is what I am looking for. And I see this, I guess the short answer to your question is the top of the funnel for me is podcast. Like I am a voracious podcast consumer. Like even though I've tried to call the list, like I find that it actually diminishes my life. So I've reached a happy balance. And I think I've talked about this on the show before in terms of I used to be that completionist type person. Yeah. And it would literally stress me out when I had 25 podcasts and like they keep, as you know, they keep pouring in day by day, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh no, like what am I going to do? Now it's 27, now it's 29. Like you're never going to finish that. And I think if you like anchor again, like, okay, I'm only going to feel good about myself when I've completed all this stuff. Well, you're going to be pretty unhappy, right?
Yeah.
And I even heard Naval Ravikant talk about this in terms of books. Actually, is like he's constantly reading like 10 or 20 different books, and when he gets to a point where he wants to stop, he just stops and he doesn't feel badly about it anymore. And I find like you can usually get like the main benefit from a book in a couple chapters if you want, or you read the whole thing, and obviously there's much more to glean. But I think that's what I've taken in terms of like podcasting is, okay, I am just trying to like take in information. And again, like when I look for those commonalities, it's so interesting. And I know you have young kids, so I actually, it's sad, I can't remember the podcast that I listened to that I learned this on, but they were talking about speaking with your kids about their school day, and you ask your kids, and you're like, "Oh, how was school today?" And they're like, "Oh, it was good," and then they move on.
Right.
And what they actually mentioned, the guest mentioned, was use the word because, like when you respond, like, "Oh, because why?" And as simple as that sounds, it is like this magic key, they described it as. And my mind went immediately to a book called Influence by Robert Cialdini, which, if I know you've read it because I can see you nodding.
Yes.
For anybody in the audience who hasn't read it, this is one of the most important books I've ever read. And it just talks about the 5 principles of persuasion. And interestingly, if you remember, he talks about using that word because in terms of being able to like up the rate that people will basically say yes to you. And it was these weird social psychology like experiments, and it's not worth going into right now, certainly. But I saw that commonality. I'm like, oh my goodness, like this is something I read 6 years ago. And now this other guy in a totally different field is telling me that there's got to be some validity to this. So I actually tried this with my daughter, Anna, totally unbeknownst to her. It's like a science experiment over the last couple of days. And she's usually pretty good, like telling me stuff. But like when I ask, how's your day? It's usually met with fine and we move on. But I've tried this because thing and it works like a charm. It's the greatest thing I've ever done in my life. So that's a very long-winded answer to your question. But yeah, like I'm always just looking for that kind of stuff. I'm looking for people that I resonate with. And then when they wrote a book, I'm going to grab it from the library. I'm going to buy it. And just because, you really can glean an amazing amount of multiple years of someone's life, right? Like that they took the time to write it in this book. And it's like, wow, you mean I can get that for either free at the library or $14 on Amazon? It's like, that's the best deal in the world.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel about it too. You're taking somebody's life experience, their knowledge, they distill it down to a couple hundred pages, and it's just up to us to spend a couple of hours to get what we can out of it. And obviously, we're not going to have the same level of understanding, nor could they go into absolute, detail. But we get a far better understanding than maybe we had to begin with. We learn something new, and that could also trigger learning the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it's kind of like I think about it like math. As weird as that sounds, I think about reading like math.
Okay.
Where you almost need one step to get to the next step to get to the next step, sort of deal. And it kind of locks in that information a little bit better when you kind of have a little bit of prerequisite knowledge that you can then apply to the next book or the next topic. And then you start to kind of mix these things together, come up with ideas. Man, it's just, it's awesome. Yeah. So you can kind of see the enthusiasm on my face and in my voice. I love reading now.
Yeah. And I actually really, that resonates with me when you said it's like math. So it actually reminds me of the mental models concept that Charlie Munger talks about. And so if you've ever listened to the podcast, The Knowledge Project by Shane Parrish, he has a website called Farnham Street. And interestingly, Farnham Street is where the Berkshire Hathaway headquarters is in Omaha, Nebraska. So for people that didn't know that or didn't put 2 and 2 together. So he's a huge fan and I don't know, accolade is maybe too strong of a word, but of Munger and Buffett. And Farnham Street actually put out a bunch, or they are continuing to put out a bunch of almost textbook type things on mental models. So I've picked up the first 3 of those volumes so far. And it is that layering. That's why like having a broad base of knowledge and education. And I hope that, and sometimes I fear that we at ChooseFI might come across as like anti-education because we have so many issues with the higher education system in the United States specifically, like with, college and just the out of control costs, the lack of potential return on investment. But like, I am the biggest proponent of education that you will ever meet. Right. And having those layers of knowledge, having those mental models that you can work through really quickly, it makes your life just better because you can process information quicker and better, and you can come up with solutions that you simply wouldn't have if you didn't have that information.
Specifically talking about education, I think I would push back a little bit. I think I disagree. I don't think you guys put a negative spin on the higher education. I think you guys open up not only opportunities, but ways of thinking about the standard path, right? We're always brought up to do good in school, get into a good college, get a good job, and so forth, work your way up the ladder. But that's not the only way. And I think that a lot of younger people need to hear that there's multiple ways. I remember listening to one of your episodes was the trades way to FI, where you could be an electrician, or you could be a welder, or you could be a plumber, or you can learn all kinds of different things, apply the financial knowledge that you learn, and still be in the same place, if not better, than somebody who's taken out $150,000, $500,000 worth of student loan debt and can't even find a job, or he maybe has a job but doesn't like it now. They realize they don't like it, like what happened to Jonathan. So I think you guys are doing a tremendous job. Mental models, those books they're in my queue actually.
No kidding.
To read. And then also, I think that you guys do the same thing in a lot of ways. You put out a lot of information on different topics, and it probably doesn't apply to everybody at the same time. But there's so much information that I think if you take it in, you can kind of have that building blocks. You're putting Legos together and building on that base of knowledge so that when your kids do go to college or are approaching college, you have those college hacks. Or when you're able to contribute to a 457 or a 403B because you're a teacher now, all that information does apply at different times. And so I think you guys do a tremendous job. And not only that, you always encourage people to take action. You actually say those words. Don't just take in information. Do something about it. But you do it in a way that's like you're talking to somebody you've known for a long time, and you're just kind of giving them the nudge that they need to say, hey, it's not that hard, and I've got your back if you have any questions.
Yeah, and you really have to start somewhere. Right. And like that's these small wins. It's similar. Like we had, as you know, James Clear on the podcast talking about his book, Atomic Habits. And sometimes it just, that very first little thing just starts this snowball like rolling downhill that becomes this runaway train, right? Like, and I'm kind of mixing metaphors, I guess, but we'll put that aside. But you mentioned that trades path to FI. So that was episode 103 with Captain DIY, he went by. That great episode. And I think that's what appeals to people about FI so much is it's about knowing the rules of the game, having options, and just understanding that you don't have to follow what society says is the path to success.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's about what you want out of life. And I think that's like really encouraging and empowering.
Yeah, personal finance is personal, like you guys always say, and everybody's got their own way of getting to where they want to go. And that's the beauty of it is we can all take in the same information, process it differently, and still come out ahead. And so we're all the better for it when we do that. And I think, just like I mentioned to you, if you do start that snowball, to go on your metaphor, you can accomplish big things. And I'm an example of that. Now, I'm just an average guy. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't have any sort of particular knowledge that will help. But that's the reason that I wanted to come on the show, is that I am just an average guy, just like the listener out there. All I did was take action on the information that you guys put out. And I would encourage everyone out there to do the same thing. You can advance so much and kind of just call the information, tailor it to what you need, and we're all going to be the better for it. And we have you to thank for that, Brad, and Jonathan, of course.
Well, thank you, certainly. But I don't want to take away from what you've done, which is remarkable, right? Like, let's be entirely clear. What you've done is truly remarkable in such a short period of time. And you said everyone can get where they want to go. Well, let's talk about where you're going, right? Like where your family's going, how this has impacted your family, because it's wonderful to talk about the mindset, right? And I think as we know, like once you get the finances straight and once you get on an autopilot, that becomes like 5 or 10% of the journey. Like at the beginning, it's much more than that, because you have to take this action. You have to get everything set on the expenses side, maybe work on your income, right? Like, and get things on autopilot. Like, there's no denying that at the beginning of your journey to FI, it's about the numbers, right? But like once you get beyond that, I think it's probably 90% mental, like we've been talking about for most of this time. And so that's why we spent all that time talking about it, because it is truly critical. But let's talk about like the actions you've taken. Because I think this is like, it just lights people up when they hear like, wow, Josue did that in that short a period of time. Like, how is that even possible? Right. Like, but people get inspired by hearing these stories of people, again, getting up off the couch and taking action. So I don't want to belabor the point. Talk me through like, okay, you found us in January of 2021. What did your financial life look like then? And like, what did you do immediately that moved the needle and made you believe, hey, I can really do this?
So I was actually in a pretty good spot. I don't want to make it seem like I was in super amount of debt or in such a bad position that I was hopeless or anything like that. Not at all. Just a normal average life, accumulating stuff like we all do, I think, and not really thinking too much about what the next step is. Like I mentioned to you, kind of drift one day to the next and not too much thought. And there wasn't a lot of space between what I was making and what I was spending. There was a small amount of space, but nothing significant, nothing that would really move the needle. And it's because a lot of the choices that I was making were not optimized. One of the first things I did, and this is kind of funny, when I called the place that had originally had my IRA that I mentioned I just forgot about for so many years, when I got in touch with them, I got kind of a cold conversation, like, you're wasting my time, why are you calling me, type of attitude. And it just kind of turned me off a little bit. And what I did is I went and I opened up an account with Vanguard. And when I spoke to them and needed some help with, transferring the money from one account to the next, making sure everything goes smooth, wow, the level of customer service, the conversation, it was like I've known these people forever. They had my back. They answered the question so easy. And that started me on the reassurance that, hey, you can do this. There's people out there that'll help you. There's people out there that'll answer your questions, as dumb as they may sound. And I asked some dumb questions. So let's start there. So the IRA was in a mutual fund and it had a bunch of different stuff. It had a high expense ratio, 1.1 or 1.2% expense ratio. And it had a front load, and I didn't even know what that meant. And the front load was 5%, which means I took a 5% haircut just for starting off the account in that mutual fund. And I didn't know that. And I think a lot of people out there don't know that these things, they have funny names and they don't break down the fees necessarily on your statements. And it's just kind of hard to read. And so you just ignore them, like, okay, I guess everything's fine. And you just kind of, file it away. But that conversation with Vanguard and having read JL's book, I moved that money that I had into a Vanguard account, put it into VTSAX, started dollar cost averaging into VTSAX from the very get-go, and went on to open up Roth IRA account, and I opened up a 401k at work, which I hadn't done for several years. I just never contributed to it because it just wasn't on my radar. And after taking all the information in about the books that I've read and the podcasts I've listened to, just like you mentioned, it kind of like, oh, I can do this now too. And oh, there's this other thing. So that just kind of started the snowball.
Yeah, it's funny just hearing your story and how much it ties like to my own, in that like I'm picturing you walking in there as a 19-year-old, or I guess it was that your first job, and and this, whoever it is, and actually I might be getting it slightly wrong, because I think you said like you had your first job and then you might have transferred it out into an IRA. So maybe it was at that point when you got hit with this huge front load, right? And that's what happened to me at 22, where I walked into like, the big nameless global bank, as a 22-year-old kid, but I had been saving and I wanted to max out. I think it was a Roth IRA also. Don't quote me on that, but it was some type of IRA. And yeah, the same deal. They stuck me in a front load. I lost, like you said, a 5% haircut, which means 5% of that money vanished as a commission.
It's
like
gone.
that. It's like criminal, right? Like, and because they just see these young kids, it's like you're chum in the water. And it's so ridiculous that like that this is allowed to exist, and like there isn't a fiduciary duty to do the right thing, which, as we know, and like, of course, we can't give financial advice on this podcast, it's specific financial advice to people, but like very few people are going to be able to outperform the market over a 50-year investing lifetime, right? Like very few fund managers, almost zero. Like I would say almost zero. So, okay, you can, like, what do we say? We say you control what you can control, which are the expenses on your funds, right? And it's like, if you can get a total stock market index fund, and we're not like all about Vanguard, though they're wonderful. Like there are plenty of great options at Fidelity and Schwab, et cetera, for a couple of hundredths of a percent, basis points as they call them, right? That's the jargon. But normal people know that as like 100th of a percent is a basis point, right? So you said you got hit with 5% fee that money vanished off the face of the earth, and then a 1.3%. So 130 of those basis points, as opposed to 4 or 5 is what you're getting charged to have a total stock market or S&P 500 index fund. Like, again, like my brain wants to explode when I hear this. And when I think about myself at 22, you right around that age, like it's just not right,
Yeah, and the other thing is, a lot of it can be traced back to just lack of knowledge. I think as a young person, had I taken in this knowledge at 16, 17, 18 years old, I would have a shield, so to speak, and be able to deflect that type of thing from happening to me if I just had a little bit of background knowledge, because then I could just do more research and do all of that. So again, the work you guys are doing, I'm sure there's a ton of young people out there taking in the information. I know there's been some episodes with the 18-year-old that took action. That type of stuff is just awesome. And so again, yeah, part of it is just lack of information.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I definitely do. It's like I'm torn, right? Like I'm obviously big on social responsibility, like your own personal responsibility, but like I'm also big on like doing the right thing, which is like, again, you shouldn't be seen as chum in the water when you walk in, like as a 19-year-old kid trying to do the right thing. So anyway, I think we're agreeing, but it's frustrating. But so, okay, 401k, let's talk about that real quick, because I think this is, again, like, you're looking for those nuggets that somebody in the audience could really pick up. So I know you weren't contributing to your 401k previously, but were you passing up on a company match? Like, did they offer a match and you missed out on it, or was there no match? Like, how does it work at your company?
So let me back up. It's actually not a 401k. It's a 457. I actually work for the state government here in California. Okay. And they do offer both the 401k and the 457. And to answer your question, no, there isn't a match. And so I didn't really miss out on any free money, so to speak. And I never looked that deep into it, partly because, Brad, I didn't really understand it that much. And just like I mentioned, at 19, I didn't really know what I was doing. Even now, a couple years later, I didn't know what I was doing either. So I never did it. It was intimidating. It was just too much to do, to learn. And I didn't do it. But after taking in all the information that I've taken in, yeah, I definitely taken action. And so now one of the first things I did is go in and see what the options were before I even opened. What kind of investment options do I have in this 457? And the best one I could find that matched what I wanted is an S&P 500 index fund with a really low expense ratio and no fees. And so that's kind of what I went with, because I feel like that's what works for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, it's nice when you find these retirement accounts that have those ultra low cost funds in them, like we kind of talk about here generally, and of course it's always personal preference, but like the more diversified you can get in terms of like total stock market, S&P 500, those are pretty close analogs of each other. And yeah, I mean, that is essentially matching the market. So if you can do that for a minimal fee, like again, that's what's so beautiful about JL Collins's message, right? Is like you don't have to have an MBA from Harvard or Wharton or wherever, right? Like because those people really aren't doing all that much better than just us with minimal knowledge, just investing in this low cost index fund, as you said, dollar cost averaging week in, week out for decades. Like that is the simple path to wealth encapsulated. And it's like, it's so beautiful, right?
Yeah, it's so simple. It's so easy. It's just, it seems like it's like a trick, a hack. How could it be this easy? And had I only just known this at 18, I wouldn't have missed out on so many years of compound interest and all that stuff. But I'm also of the thinking that Jonathan says it a lot, or he used to say it a lot, and that is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. And so maybe I can go back and, man, I should have had this, or I should have done that, but that's not productive. What is productive is, hey, take in what you know now and act on it. And so that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah. And it's easy to beat yourself up, right? Like I still, even to this day, do that with like the ridiculous real estate speculation that I did in my 20s. And like, even just frankly, like just learning, you learn stuff about yourself, even when you make these mistakes, maybe especially when you make these mistakes, honestly, right? Like in March of 2020, when it felt like the world was coming to an end and you didn't know what was going to happen, like my brain freaked out. And I didn't know what to do because like that scarcity mindset, I think is still somewhere deep down in my brain. And I think by going through some of these crazy experiences, like the housing crash, the 2006 to 2008, the market, I was a little bit too young for the .com bubble, but I got a little bit of it with like investing in WorldCom, which went to zero, but it's a couple $100. But again, like you learn from these things, right? And like I think it's very important because it makes you better, it makes you wiser, it makes you stronger the next time one of these calamities happens, because they're coming, right? Like as we know, these kind of things happen in the stock market regularly. Like that's not, if a smooth ride is the only thing you're looking for, the stock market ain't it, right?
Nope. Yeah, I don't think there's any investment class that's going to have just a smooth ride that's going to, offer the kind of returns that one would hope for, and all. Nothing's risk free, nothing's super smooth. If there's anything that's going right, just wait. If there's anything going wrong, just wait. It's going to change, right? And just knowing that, having that reassurance that these are all cycles, it's normal, and knowing what your time horizons are is crucially important, because then you can avoid the noise and the doom and gloom and just focus on, hey, none of this matters because it doesn't really affect me now. And my ultimate goal is 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. And so, yeah, it's reassuring to know that it's going to be okay.
It is going to be okay. And yeah, that time horizon is so important, right? And it's so easy to lose sight of that. This is not a sprint. It's not about what happened the last quarter. It's right. What is going to happen over the next 20, 30, 50 years, right? And I think that it's easy to lose sight of that, but it's so critical that we don't lose sight of it or get back on track when we do, right?
Absolutely.
So, okay. So it sounds like you weren't investing in the 457 at work, but I suspect strongly that has changed dramatically. Now there is no match, as you said, but obviously you get a tax deduction for investing in the 457. So I guess, where does that fit in? Because it's not a slam dunk, right? And we actually had Nick Majuli on the podcast last week, and he mentioned that he was talking almost about like opportunity costs in terms of maxing out a 401k or 457, et cetera, as a young person. And, he talked about, hey, I want to get my full match and I theoretically want to put more in, but I really want to look at this holistically. So I think that, again, without looking at personal finance as doctrine, right? Because we hate that. It's what is your life and what are the situations that are today? But again, surveying the field, understanding that things change, right? So like maxing, like for me, maxing my 401k might make a ton of sense now, but I'm also willing to say like, okay, I understand what the benefits are of that. And I also understand potentially what I'm giving up in the short run, which is maybe having access to that cash. And right, like the benefit is getting the tax deduction, and I can calculate what that means. So it's not like a doctrine of you have to max out your 401k. Like it's pretty nice to get that tax deduction, but it frankly depends what tax bracket you're in also, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a very long-winded like general thought, but I'm curious, like where does the 457 fit in like any other retirement vehicles?
So I do have the Roth IRA account that I have for myself, and actually we opened up one for my wife as well, and contributed to both of those. And yeah, you're right. There is opportunity costs in everything that we do, right? Whether it's time or money or what have you. And I think that at this point, I've gone through enough options in my head that this makes the most sense for me now. And there are seasons of life, as you guys say a lot, that hey, things are going to come up, things are going to change. You might have different goals, different outlook, and I know that I can always make changes whenever I need to. And as long as I stay, as long as I prioritize what's most important to me, I think I'll always come out ahead.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that is like another kind of hallmark of just the FI mindset is understanding things can change and do and will, right? Like, and that's fine. Like that is life. And I think that goes back to the beginning of our conversation in terms of this is why we learn, right?
Right.
So we can be mentally nimble when things change and we don't get stuck in silos in terms of just general thought or like very specifically like this is how I live my life, this is how I've always lived my life, like that's kind of like abhorrent to me. I'm always learning, and I understand like listen, something that I hold near and dear today could change, right? Like I am open-minded with everything, even down to hey, we're talking about total stock market index fund, S&P 500. Like there is a chance 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now that we look back on 2022 and think it's quaint that, oh, they used to think that was the slam dunk way to invest, right? Like, could that be 100 years from now? Of course it could. If you think otherwise, you're a fool. Like everything can change and you just need to be aware of that, right? So like, I'm not forecasting that. So lest anybody think otherwise, I'm not forecasting that. That is what I invest in today. But do I think that is sacrosanct and is going to be the case 100 years from now? 100%? No, of course not. Right. So I think it's just important to be open-minded.
Yeah, the only thing that's certain is change itself, right? And so going on that same note there, the one of the other things I did besides put my investments in the right place and try to think about money strategies and things is one of the episodes you guys talked about whole life insurance and how laden it is with fees and how expensive it is. And when I was expecting my first child, who's now 10 years old, so we're talking 11 years ago, a door-to-door salesman from a life insurance company came and asked me the right questions and got me to sign up. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into necessarily. He kind of sweet talked me and told me the benefits and how it grows, and the money then is investable and you can borrow against it. But he didn't really break down the fees or how that worked, how he got paid, any of that. And so hearing you guys talk about it kind of opened up that door as well, start doing some research. And so I changed an expensive whole life insurance policy over to a term life policy, which gave me 10 times the coverage at a lot less cost. And so
tiny fraction.
Just that alone. And because the reason is I didn't know why one is better than the other. I didn't know what the differences were, frankly. And then once I learned that, I was like, wait a minute, I don't need a whole life insurance policy. It's just in the event that something happens to me in the interim while I'm building my nest egg, so to speak. And so just knowing that was, again, kind of reassuring. And you guys drop these nuggets every so often, and I just pick them up and run with them and take action on them. And it's made a world of difference.
Yeah, and that one especially is just so so like galling, right? Like because you're trying to do the right thing. You have your first son coming. It's important to have insurance, and the funny thing, like I'm thinking in my head now is like, could you imagine a door-to-door salesman for term life insurance? Right? Like never in a million years because it's not laden with fees, it's not laden with commissions, and yeah, like they are very convincing. So you shouldn't beat yourself up about it. It's like, hey, you're trying to do the right thing. You're at that point in your life where this is really important, and there's this person purporting to be an expert, right? Who is answering all the questions and weaves a good tale, and it happens. And I think it's important that again you're like able to just say, okay, look, that may or may not have been a mistake, or probably was that with the benefit of hindsight, but I can change that. Right. And I suspect, and you said I changed it over from a whole life to a term, but I suspect, and I'd love for you to clarify, like, did you canceled your whole life policy and then just purchased a new term life policy, right?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, again, like to each his own, and this is not to say that every insurance policy that's not term life is horrifically bad, but that said, for the audience, like my strong recommendation for my own life and what we do for our own lives is term life, because it's super simple. It's exactly what you're looking for from an insurance policy. Is like it's literally just, as morbid as it sounds, a bet against your death, right? And like I'm paying this nominal little fee, and it's only a couple $100 depending on your health and age for a couple $100,000 of benefit. And okay, obviously the policy pays out if you get hit by the proverbial bus, but that's what you're doing it for. You're getting it to safeguard your family, right? So for a couple $100 a year to do that, that was a deal that I couldn't pass up. So, as opposed to like a whole life, which kind of conflates investing with insurance in this weird kind of let's pay a lot of fees way. So, of course, everybody needs to research this on their own, but yeah, that's my kind of quick take on insurance for sure.
Yeah. The other thing I had, Brad, because I know you kind of wanted to go down the list of the actions that I've taken, is I used to lease cars,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of funny, and I laugh because I thought I was smart. I thought I was doing it the right way because I would search out the deals. I found a website where they teach you how leases work and how some cars lease better than others, and how you could get a really good deal on different cars. And so I did that. I had a lease payment for 6 years. And when I think about the opportunity cost of something like that, I kind of beat myself up about it, like I would. But now I know better, right? And so that's one thing that I did is I from that same website that showed me how to lease cars cheaply, somebody recommended, well, hey, if you want to get out of your lease, you don't have to just wait till it's over. You don't have to just turn it in when the term is up and pay the fees for excess wear and tear and all that stuff. What you can actually do is go down to CarMax or go down to any dealership like that, and they'll actually purchase the vehicle from you. They'll pay the lease, and if there's a difference, they'll cut you a check for whatever amount you're in the green for.
Oh,
And
wow.
luckily, on the most recent one, they actually cut me an $1,800 check for the car. They paid off the lease. They did all the paperwork, and it was super easy. So from there, I used that money along with a little bit of money that I had saved up, and I bought a used car. And I've had the used car ever since. And I saved so much money just by not having, because it's not just the lease payment, it's the insurance for a brand new car is a lot more, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's one other thing that really helped me move the needle, is to prioritize where my money goes and just really think through. And this goes back to the life insurance thing too. You're absolutely right. Maybe term's not right for everybody. Maybe whole's not right for everybody. Leasing or purchasing or even having a used car is not for everybody, but we can all take the same information, apply it to our own lives, and then come out with the best solution. And that's kind of what I did.
Yeah. And that's really cool. I actually I'd never heard of that before. Maybe if you can dig up that website that you found, we could put it in the show notes. But that's I'd never heard of that before in terms of like selling the car. I mean, it stands to reason, and that's funny. Like it's just like outside of your zone of awareness, right? Like when you say it, it stands to reason that makes sense, right? Like there's nothing ultra complicated going on here. In essence, you could buy your way out of it. You sell the car, right? Like it makes sense when I'm putting the pieces together, but like I would have never thought of that. Never, ever, ever.
Yeah, essentially the lease is just a loan like any other, and if there's some difference in what you owe and what the car is worth, then yeah, they'll just cut you a check for the difference. And the same as you, I had no idea, and it's one of those things, taking information from somewhere and acting on it, and lo and behold, it works.
Right. And just like asking questions. Okay, this seems to make sense.
Absolutely.
Trust but verify, right? Like let's find out some more.
Oh yeah.
That's super cool. I love it. You see me like kind of shaking my head and chuckling. It's like, that's so obvious once you say it, but it's not obvious at all. I've lived my entire adult life not realizing that. So yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So, right. It sounds like it's a lot of clearly, cutting expenses. And I think you told me like with your like meals, you're trying to be more intentional and, you're maxing out these retirement accounts. So like, it sounds like everything's going in the right direction, right? Like where are you in terms of like savings rate? Is that something you've calculated before?
So I have, and to be perfectly honest with you, I can't give you the number exactly. And here's why. When I hear you say certain things, it resonates with me. And a lot of the things, what you've said many times is you like to keep things simple. And I'm very much the same way. I don't budget. I don't have a line by line. I'm going to spend this month and spend that next month. No, I just kind of keep things kind of within a realm of reason within my head and spend on what I value. And I got that from you guys verbatim. I used to just kind of buy stuff at random and subscribe to X, Y, and Z. And before you know it, you have a bunch of subscriptions that you don't even use. Well, what I do now instead is I cut out a lot of the stuff to get to the bare minimum and then just kind of slowly start adding back what I think I value, what I like, what moves the needle forward financially, but also gives me that the fun that I'm looking for, the time spent with my family, the experiences. That's the word I was looking for. And so that's kind of what I try to do. Ballpark, I would say my savings rate is somewhere between probably 30 and 40. And it kind of depending on what you, how you do it, right? Whether
right,
it's pre-tax or post-tax and all this stuff. But yeah, somewhere in that realm. And I don't want to complicate it too much. And because I think the way my brain works is if I calculate it down to like the exact number, the moment I start to kind of move away from that, it'll cause me stress. And so I try to just not do that.
Yeah, I'm with you because that's exactly how I'd respond to it. Yeah, like it then becomes a game I have to win.
Right.
As opposed to what I'm ultimately doing here is being intentional about my life, right? Trying to maximize the value from these purchases as opposed to just winning some arbitrary game with myself.
Right. And to your point, I think you mentioned also that you actually said it in one of the episodes is put things on autopilot if you can, or maybe it was a newsletter, but in either case, you said put your finances on autopilot. And I never did, Brad. I always would go in month after month and manually process a payment online on every single account. And that just took so much time and so much energy. And so along with my bills being paid on autopilot, I also have all the money that I want to invest on autopilot as well. And so like whatever's left in my account is kind of what I go off of. And just kind of keeping a brief overview, every couple of weeks on what's going on gives me that just freedom, that mental freedom to do and focus on the things that I want to focus on, which family and reading and experiences and playing board games with my kids and all that type of stuff. The real, the stuff that brings me joy in life is what I get to focus on now.
Wow, man, that's, it's hard to top that. I mean, that's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And yeah, I mean, we talked about the 80-20 from the Simple Path to Wealth. And like, that is to me, the 80-20 of the path to ChooseFI, right? The path to FI. And it's so easy to get bogged down in the details, but like, I don't think that brings a ton of value to most people. Now, obviously there are people that love to optimize and over optimize, but like, I don't think that's more than a couple percentage of a couple percent of our community. Right. But to each their own. That's great if they want to do that. But for you and I, like, it's about this, how can I how can I make this work in a system that makes my life better, right? Like simplifies it, cuts out the stress, allows me to focus not on the minutia of the details, right? But giving me the space and the freedom to play those board games with your kids and not have to stress like, is that bill going to be paid today? I have to check to see if it came out of the bank, or I'm going to get hit with a late fee or some ridiculous nonsense like that. So yeah, I mean, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I like I said, a lot of the stuff that I'm saying now, this wasn't the case just 2 years ago, Brad. Before I started listening to you guys, I wasn't thinking about these things, and I want to make it like super clear that I'm just a normal, average guy, and anybody out there who thinks that they can't make a huge difference in their life, you can. Whether you have a six-figure income or not, it doesn't matter. You can make changes that not only boost your finances but boost your mental game, bring you happiness, mental clarity, will help you sleep good at night. And all of those things are invaluable also. So I would encourage everybody out there to hopefully take in this episode and take action, read books, listen to podcasts, take in the information, absolutely make it and apply it to your life. And you'll see the difference that's on the other side.
Man, what you've done in under 2 years is remarkable. So just a huge congrats to you, your family. It's going to make an immeasurable difference. So, and thank you for being part of the community and reaching out.
Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, it's amazing. So as you know, since you've listened to all of our episodes, we used to do a segment called the Hot Seat, and I am bringing it back with ridiculous camping music and all. So are you ready for it?
Let's do it.
In a world drowning in debt and rampant consumption, trapped by the chains of lifestyle inflation, these questions highlight the secrets of those who have broken free. Welcome to the ChooseFI Hot Seat.
All right, Josue, question number 1, your favorite blog, podcast, or book? Or give us a couple if you want.
Well, that's easy. Favorite podcast, ChooseFI. I've listened to every single one of your episodes. Like I mentioned before, there's a nugget of information in every single one, from financial to mental to you name it. It's the style in which you guys bring it, the production quality, all of it wrapped together. Man, it makes it so easy to take action and just kind of level up. So ChooseFI, 100%. As far as books go, there's actually one book I read. All this optimizing and pushing and getting better and getting more done and all this stuff sometimes can be a distraction too. Kind of like you mentioned with Naval Ravikant, you could read 10 books at one time, taking all kinds of information. You just want to stop. You stop. And I read this book called 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And the book basically talks about a lot of things, but one of the things that I got out of it was that we need to focus on what we want and what we value. And by doing that, you can kind of cut out a lot of the unimportant notifications on your phone, getting all this other stuff done that doesn't matter, and focus on the things that do. And for me, that's focusing on my family, focusing on experiences, and not worrying about climbing the ladder at work just because that's what I'm supposed to do is climb the ladder. And with that comes, long meetings and working weekends and different things that may take away from what actually matters, and that's taking care of your kids. So anybody out there, or everybody really, if you haven't read that book, I definitely recommend 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman.
Yeah, that's cool. I've had that book on hold for like months now at my library. I'm like, there's a really long wait. I think at this point, I'm just going to buy it from Amazon, I suspect. But yeah, so 4,000 Weeks is essentially looking at like an 80-year lifetime, as I understand it, times 52. That gets you to, a little more than 4,000. So it's looking at that. And, you kind of look at, hey, where am I in life? I'm a little more than halfway through that potentially 4,000 weeks. So yeah, that's a very, very cool perspective. So, all right, let's go. Question number 2, an inflection point in your life that was especially memorable or meaningful.
So going back to that beginner's mindset and not really being ashamed of asking questions. When I first heard inflection point, I didn't know what it meant. And so I actually had to go up and look up the definition. And what I found was a turning point in your life, right? Or something along those lines. And again, it's easy, and I'm kind of sounding like a super fanboy or whatever. But again, ChooseFI, listening to you guys was the turning point for me, and not even financially, Brad, just mentally, what you've allowed me to do. And I kind of say that kind of tongue in cheek, is, man, just explore what interests me, and it just opened up a world of opportunity for me. And I can't thank you guys enough for the work that you do.
Man, you are, it's amazing. I really appreciate all the kind words. And, as I told you before we hit record, like it means the world to me. And I can't get that across probably clearly enough without maybe crying in front of the entire audience here. But yeah, it just means a lot that you and people out there are listening and taking action. It means more than you could ever imagine. So thank you sincerely. All right, Josue, question number 3, your favorite life hack.
So favorite life hack, books, the library, having access to experts, their lives, their experiences. In just a couple of hundred books, I can learn about everything from health to finances to history to you name it. It's a wealth of information. Not very many people, at least at my library, take advantage of it. I go in there, and although there are some people, I think it should be packed to the gills with people, just because there's so much, not just information in books, but a lot of free stuff. I learned recently that you can actually check out a pass to the state parks, where you don't have to pay for entrance to the state parks. You just go to the library,
that's cool.
You check it out, you do your thing, and then when you're done, you bring it back, and then the next person can use it, and the next person, and it's $15, $20 or whatever it is to get into these parks. But sometimes that may be a barrier for entry for some people, or even if it's not. I mean, the FI mindset allows you to make choices that move the needle. And if I'm already at the library checking out a bunch of books and I have a trip coming up, well, hey, why not take advantage? And yeah, there's tablets that you can rent out for your kids. There's just a ton of things, and I would encourage everybody to be a friend of the library. Go and check out your library, see what's available, read some books, and it doesn't even have to be, again, financial or self-improvement books, fiction, whatever your fancy is. I think you can find it at the library.
Yeah, and certainly every library system has just a different array of benefits and random free stuff that you could never imagine that you can take advantage of. So yeah, as you said multiple times now, ChooseFI, friends of the library, everybody should check it out. And so you mentioned trips. So I've kind of added a couple random new questions here into the hot seat that we'll do a smattering of. So I think travel rewards is actually something that you've gotten into recently. Have you had any like successful travel rewards trips that you can regale us about?
So travel before I listened to your show never was a possibility for me, just because, when you price these things, sometimes it can be an exorbitant amount, and it's like a huge barrier for me and for a lot of people. But learning about travel rewards and the strategies and certain cards that you can get and the points that you can use, I've always wanted to take my wife on a trip to Hawaii, and I was able to do that on travel rewards. And she was really kind of amazed that it works. It's not, it's not a gimmick. It actually, you can use points. You can get all the way to wherever you want to go, and it's going to cost you a fraction of what you would have spent otherwise. So to get into the nitty gritty, I took her on a trip to Kauai for 5 nights, and I used. Cool thing is, I got a Southwest card, and at the time they were giving you 30,000 points and a companion pass. I didn't have to earn it; it just kind of came with the bonus.
Yeah, that was a short time. I remember that.
Yeah, and so I got the companion pass. I was able to book flights in probably not the most optimized way, because again, this is all kind of new to me. But I think it was 24,000 points for 2 people round trip.
Yeah, that's not too shabby.
And then also I stayed at the Sheraton in Kauai for 5 nights.
Okay, so Marriott points.
Yeah, that would have cost me, that hotel, about $700 a night. And it ended up costing me, I think, $40 because they get you with the resort fees or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But that came with free bike rentals, which we didn't really get to take advantage of. But yeah, a lot of other cool stuff that you could have done with that $40. And so really all we spent when we were down there was on food and, your experiences. And one cool tip, and I don't know if this is much of a tip or not, but one thing I really got out of the trip is we did not get a rental car. And part of the reason was it was ridiculously expensive. I would have spent probably about $1,000 for 5 days to rent a car in there. And to me, it wasn't worth it if I'm only paying $40 a night for the hotel. And so what we did instead is we did some research. We found out that Kauai has one main road. They have a bus system that it's fantastic, and it runs up and down the island. It'll take you pretty much wherever you want to go. And it costs us $5 a day each to get to where we wanted to go. So it saved us a bunch of money. But not only that, we got to walk and talk to a lot of the locals there. We got to kind of get a behind the scenes look, so to speak, of the destination, where a lot of the tourists were just sticking to the roads. And one cool thing, we were taking a walk right along the beach, and we look over to our right, and there's a bunch of sea turtles kind of surfing the waves. And if you were driving down that road, you would never have seen it. So if I had rented a car, there's just that small experience, those couple of minutes that we got to enjoy the turtle surfing. It was just me and my wife that got to experience that, and nobody else. Awesome.
That is absolutely amazing. I love that. All right. So we have what we used to call a bonus question. I'm not sure where we came up with that, but what purchase have you made in the last 12 months or so that has added the most value to your life?
I was hoping you would ask me this one. I love to cook. I absolutely love being in the kitchen. It's one of those things that when I start, I kind of get into that flow state where I'm just in the zone. Nothing else nothing else matters. It's just tunnel vision. But I absolutely enjoy it 100%. And so what I did is I made the mistake one time of using the stove when our slow cooker was parked right next to the stove, and it kind of melted the face of our slow cooker. And so we had to throw it out. But what that allowed me to do is do some research and figure out what can I do, because I like gadgets as much as anybody else, but I don't like things that do just one thing. I want them to be able to do multiple things. So I went out and I researched and I bought a Ninja Foodie pressure cooker multi-function machine.
Okay.
And it's awesome because it allows me to air fry, pressure cook, slow cook. I mean, it's like a 12-in-1 thing, and it's just absolutely awesome. It saves time, it saves money. It's absolutely one. Now it is expensive, so it was also a splurge for me. But the way I figure it is 10 or 12 machines in one. Hey, it's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, that sounds like a win. And regardless, you're getting a ton of value out of it. And I can just see it's like lighting you up just talking about it. That's so cool. That is so cool. Josue, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me.
All right, we're definitely going to have to do a round 2 sometime for sure.
Absolutely.
Nice. And yeah, to the audience, the way that Josue got in touch with me was literally hitting respond to my FI Weekly email. I send this out every single Tuesday. You can get on the newsletter list at ChooseFI.com/subscribe. And I literally sit down and write this email last minute, like a procrastinator, every Monday. Sends out Tuesday. You hit reply. It's coming to me. So tell me your story. Tell me what action you're taking. We are all in this together. This is truly a community. That's what it's all about.